They took my house key first, then they took my car key. Then my son stood at a counter and told a stranger I wasn't worth the trouble. He signed a form with my name on it. He didn't check the date. He didn't check the signature above his own. 3 days later, black government sedans came down a farm road, doing exactly the speed limit. They turned into a gravel lot. A man in dress blues got out. He saluted me, in front of everyone who thought I was already gone. Nobody in that room breathed for a second. Not one person. But before the salute, there was a pen on a counter, and my son's voice saying I was just a lonely old lady. The intake nurse at Fairhaven asked if I had any family who'd visit. My son Greg laughed. The small, apologetic laugh men use to excuse something they already know is cruel. "Don't bother," he said. "She's just a lonely old lady." Then he slid the pen across the counter. For me to sign myself away. I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. 30 years of signing manifests does that to a hand. Requisitions, casualty reports. You learn to hold steady no matter what's underneath it. I looked at the form before I signed it. Admission date, March the 11th. Below that, a line. Residence prior consent, dated. A date 3 weeks earlier. A date I did not remember signing anything on. A signature that curved wrong on the R close, not mine. I signed anyway. I didn't say a word. Not yet. My name is Eleanor Brennan. Everyone calls me Nora. I am 71 years old. I spent 30 years in the United States Army, Logistics Command, 2 deployments, retired as a full colonel. I don't tell people that. I never have. It never seemed like the kind of thing you bring up at a potluck. I did not raise my voice at that counter. I did not ask Greg what he meant by lonely. I have heard worse from louder men in quieter rooms. My son's little performance for a tired young nurse did not impress me much. I folded my hands on the counter and let him talk. That's what people never understand about a woman like me. Quiet isn't defeat. Quiet is just where I keep my ammunition. 3 weeks before that morning, I was still in my own kitchen, on Hartwell Road, on the edge of Briarfield, Indiana, an hour south of Indianapolis, if you don't hit the trains. Grain elevator on one side of town, a Methodist church on the other, nothing much taller than either one. I liked it that way. After 30 years of bases and briefings, quiet suited me. I kept a green ledger on the kitchen table. Every bill, every deposit, every receipt, written down by hand, the same way I once tracked fuel convoys and spare parts across 2 deployments. Numbers don't lie to you, not if you write them down honestly. People do. Greg had come by more that month than he had in the 2 years since his father died. He'd sit at my table, drink my coffee, ask questions he'd never asked before. How much was the house worth these days? Did I still have the deed, or had Ray filed it with the bank? Was I sure I didn't want to simplify things now that I was on my own? I answered him plainly every time. I always answer plainly. I just don't always answer completely. My husband, Raymond Brennan, died 6 years ago. Ray was Army too, a master sergeant for 22 years. I outranked him by 2 rungs eventually, and neither of us ever made a thing of it. We built this house together in 1988, paid it off in full 9 years before he passed. Ray read the fine print on everything. His own life insurance, twice. A trust document too, one he had me sign at a lawyer's office in Indianapolis 8 years ago. I never asked many questions about it. Ray asked me to trust him. 30 years of marriage teaches you something. When a careful man asks for that kind of trust, there's a reason underneath it. He left me a letter, sealed, in an envelope inside the cedar chest at the foot of our bed. On the front, in his handwriting, "Open only if Greg ever comes for the house." I never opened it. Not once in 6 years. I didn't need to. I knew where it was. That was enough. Greg is 44. He built condominiums and strip malls around Indianapolis until the market turned. A project called Callaway Ridge started bleeding money, fast and everywhere at once, the way a stuck pig bleeds. I didn't know the numbers. I only knew his voice had gotten thinner over the phone the last year, the way a man's voice thins right before he asks for something he's ashamed to need. He never asked me outright. That was the strange part. He asked around the edges. Did I still have the deed? Did I still drive much? Once, almost gently, did I ever get confused about dates? I did not get confused about dates. I have never once in my life gotten confused about a date. But I let him ask. I let him think whatever he needed to think. A man circling a question that carefully is a man planning something. The fastest way to learn a plan is to let the planner keep talking. 3 weeks before Fairhaven, a courier left an envelope at my door from a bank I didn't recognize. First Meridian Trust, addressed to me, referencing an account I had never opened. Inside was a statement. One line read, Callaway Holdings, secured advance, $41,000, collateral, residential property, Hartwell Road, Briarfield, Indiana, my address, my house, a loan I never took, secured against a home I paid off with my own service and my husband's 12 years ago. I read it twice. I did not call Greg. I called Dale Pruitt instead. Dale had handled Ray's estate, a small-town lawyer, 3 rooms above the hardware store on Main, the kind of man who still used a paper calendar, who remembered every client's grandchildren's names by heart. I told him about the statement. I told him about the questions Greg had been circling. Dale went quiet on the line a long moment. Then he said, Nora, do you still have that envelope Ray left you? The one from the chest? I told him I did. Don't open it yet, he said. But don't let it out of your sight either. I didn't know that afternoon what was coming. I didn't know that within 3 weeks I'd be signing a form with a forged date on it. At a nursing home counter. While my own son told a stranger I was just a lonely old woman. I didn't know that a folded flag in my closet mattered. That a dress uniform pressed behind it was about to matter more than it had in years. I only knew one thing. A man who circles a question that carefully eventually stops circling. 2 days after that call, Greg came by again. This time with paperwork of his own. He called it the sensible thing. He called it just in case. He set a folder on my kitchen table, the same table where I kept my green ledger. Inside it was a form for a general power of attorney. Beneath that, tucked almost as an afterthought, a second form. An application for guardianship, filled out in advance, my name already printed at the top, in a font, not handwriting. Some clerk's hand had done the work I never asked anyone to do. It's just to make things easier, he said. If something happens. Something like what? I said. He didn't answer that directly. He said something about my age, something about how Dad would have wanted things simplified. He said the word confused once, carefully, testing it in the air between us, like a man tapping a wall to find the stud. I didn't sign either form that day. I told him I'd think about it. I poured him more coffee. I asked about his kids, my grandchildren, Emily and small Ray, named for his father, a detail that still cost me something every time I said it out loud. I let Greg leave believing he'd planted a seed that would grow on its own. That was exactly what I wanted him to believe. That night, I took the sealed envelope out of the cedar chest. I set it on the kitchen table, unopened, beside the green ledger. I sat there a long time, looking at Ray's handwriting on the front. Open only if Greg ever comes for the house. I did not open it. Dale had told me not to yet. 30 years of following good orders from people who'd earned my trust, Wasn't a habit I intended to break for my own curiosity. I called Dale again the next morning. He asked me to bring him the first Meridian statement, a copy of the guardianship form too, if I could get one. Anything else Greg had shown me. I made copies at the library on Tuesday. My own printer had been acting up ever since Greg's last visit. A printer acting up right when a woman starts asking about her own finances is not a coincidence I was inclined to overlook. Dale looked at the loan statement a long time in his office above the hardware store. He looked at the signature on the application. He set both down, took off his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, the way he did when a thing was worse than he'd hoped. "Nora," he said, "this isn't your signature." "I know," I said. "Do you want to call the sheriff?" I thought about it. I thought about Ray's letter, waiting on my kitchen table. I thought about 30 years of learning one lesson. The loudest response is rarely the smartest one. You gather what you need first. You let the other side keep talking until they've said enough to hang themselves with their own words. "Not yet," I said. "Let's see what he does next." What he did next, I would learn 11 days later, was call Fairhaven Senior Residence. He scheduled an intake appointment in my name, without telling me, using the guardianship application he still believed I hadn't seen, using a consent form dated 3 weeks before I ever set foot in the building. He believed, I think, that once I was inside those walls, quiet and unfamiliar, far from my own kitchen table, nobody would think twice. A son, taking over his aging mother's affairs. He believed a woman who kept her medals in a shoebox instead of on a wall had nothing underneath the quiet. He had no idea what he was standing on. The morning they came for me, Greg pulled into my driveway at 8 sharp. A rented van. 2 men I didn't recognize. He told me Fairhaven had a lovely opening. "Just for a little while," he said. "Just until things settled down. Just until the house situation got sorted out." He used the word situation the way men use it, when they mean something they'd rather not name outright. I did not argue. I packed one suitcase myself, my dress uniform folded at the bottom, beneath my clothes. I have never in my life gone anywhere without it. I let him drive me the 11 miles to Fairhaven, without a single raised word passing between us. At the counter, the intake nurse, a young woman with a kind, tired face, asked Greg if there was family who'd be visiting. That's when he laughed, said I was just a lonely old lady, slid the pen across the counter. I signed my own name below a date I hadn't written, below a signature that wasn't mine. I did not say a word about either one. I don't get loud, I get accurate, and accuracy, unlike anger, keeps very well over time. Fairhaven Senior Residence sat past the last stretch of cornfield, a long brick building, a covered porch, a parking lot of white gravel that crunched under every tire that came through it. My room was number 14, small, clean, a single window facing the fields. I unpacked my own suitcase myself. Nobody offered to help, and I didn't ask. 30 years of packing for deployments teaches your hands where everything belongs, without a word said out loud. I set the dress uniform in the back of the closet, still folded, still wrapped the way I'd wrapped it the last time I wore it, at Ray's funeral. I stood at the graveside in full dress, and not one person in that town understood why. I hung it there and shut the door. The woman who came by that first evening to check my paperwork was named Nadine Ferris. The admissions coordinator, mid-30s, tired eyes, a clipboard she carried like it weighed more than it should. She was kind, the way people are kind after they've watched too many families do exactly what mine had just done, and learned not to say anything about it out loud. "Anyone we should call besides your son?" she asked. "Emergency contact, next of kin, anyone like that?" "No one else," I said. She frowned at the folder in her hands, just slightly. the kind of frown you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. "There's no medical directive on file," she said. "No power of attorney. That's unusual for someone your son says has been declining." "I haven't been declining," I said. She looked at me a second longer than the question required. Then she wrote something on her clipboard, moved to the next line. Blood pressure, medications, allergies. The ordinary machinery of an ordinary intake. But she'd noticed something. I could tell by the way her pen paused. People who process paperwork for a living develop an instinct for numbers that don't add up. Same as I had. Nadine Ferris had just found her first one. I kept my green ledger with me. I'd slipped it into the suitcase, under my clothes, before Greg loaded the van. The first night at Fairhaven, sitting at the small desk by the window, I opened it. I wrote the date. March the 11th. Beneath it, in the same block letters I'd used for 30 years of supply manifests. Admitted Fairhaven. Consent form dated 3 weeks prior. Signature not mine. An aide passing my door that night saw me writing. She smiled the gentle, condescending smile people reserve for old women who keep journals. The kind of smile that assumes the writing is nostalgia or confusion, a habit with no teeth in it. She had no idea what she was looking at. Neither did Greg. That was, and remains, the whole of my advantage. Nobody in that building had any idea what 30 years of discipline looked like from the outside. From the outside, it looks exactly like an old woman writing quietly in a notebook. 2 days into my stay, Greg called the front desk. Not me, the front desk, to ask about next steps for the guardianship filing. Nadine took the call. She told me about it that afternoon, carefully, watching my face while she said it. "He's asking us to support a competency evaluation," she said. "For the guardianship petition. He wants it done before the end of the month. Did you tell him yes?" "I told him I'd need documentation first. His paperwork's thin, Mrs. Brennan. No medical records, no physician referral, just a form he had you sign." I looked at her a long moment. "Call me Colonel," I said. "If you're going to call me anything." She blinked. "Colonel? Retired," I said. 30 years. It doesn't come up much." She didn't laugh at me. She didn't fawn over me either, which I respected more than either reaction would have earned. She just nodded slowly, the way a careful person nods when a puzzle piece clicks somewhere in the back of their mind. She wrote something else on her clipboard. That evening, I finally called Dale from the hallway phone, the one bolted to the wall by the nurses' station. Fairhaven didn't allow residents to keep cell phones charged past 9, and mine had died somewhere around lunch. I told him about the guardianship push, about Nadine's questions, about the thin file Greg had submitted. "He's moving fast," Dale said. "Faster than I expected. That tells me something." "Tells you what?" "Tells me he's got a deadline of his own," Dale said. "Men, like your son, don't rush unless something's chasing them." I thought about the first Meridian statement. I thought about Callaway Ridge, bleeding money for over a year. I thought about the thinness in Greg's voice on the phone, the last several months, a thinness I had mistaken, foolishly, for grief over his father. It had been something else the whole time. Fear wears the same voice as sorrow if you're not listening closely enough. "Dale," I said, "I think this was never about me being confused. I think this is about him needing me declared incompetent before something else catches up to him." There was a pause on the line. "The Callaway loan," Dale said. "The Callaway loan. If a judge signs off on guardianship, and Greg's named guardian," Dale said slowly, working it out loud, "then any objection you raise gets filed as the ramblings of an incompetent woman. He's not trying to steal the house outright, Nora. He's trying to make sure nobody believes you. When you say it was stolen." I sat with that, in the quiet of the hallway, the fluorescent light humming overhead. an aide's cart squeaking somewhere down the corridor. It was, I'll admit, a cleverer plan than I'd given my son credit for. Not clever enough, but cleverer than I'd expected from a boy who used to lose his own bicycle in our own driveway. I need that envelope, Dale said. Ray's letter. Can you get someone to bring it to me? Nadine, I said. The admissions coordinator here. She's been asking the right questions. Can you trust her? I thought about the way her pen had paused over an empty line on a clipboard. I think so, I said. She's the kind who notices when the numbers don't match. The next morning, I asked Nadine, quietly, in the hallway between breakfast and the medication round, would she drive out to my house on her lunch break? Retrieve a sealed envelope from the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. I told her where the spare key was hidden, under the third flower pot from the porch steps, the same spot Ray and I had used for 40 years. Nobody ever thinks to check a flower pot. She hesitated. That's a lot to ask of someone you've known 2 days, Colonel. It is, I said, but you're the only person in this building who's asked me a real question since I walked in. That tells me something, too. She looked at me the same careful way she'd looked at her clipboard, the night she asked about the missing power of attorney. Then she nodded. I'll go on my lunch, she said. What am I looking for exactly? An envelope, I said. Sealed. My husband's handwriting on the front. You'll know it when you see it. She did know it when she saw it. She told me later. She opened that cedar chest. The first thing she found sitting on top, tucked inside the leather cover of an old Bible, wasn't the envelope at all. It was a small cream business card, slightly yellowed, the kind of card you keep for decades because you never expect to need it and can't quite bring yourself to throw it away. It read, Major General Raymond Kessler, United States Army, retired. A phone number below it, in old-fashioned print. Nadine didn't know who that was. She had no reason to. But she was the kind of woman who followed a loose thread simply because it was there. On her way back to Fairhaven, envelope in her purse, she pulled into the gas station on Route 9. On an impulse she couldn't later fully explain, she dialed the number on the card. A man answered on the second ring. Gruff, clipped, the voice of someone used to being obeyed the first time he spoke. Kessler. I'm sorry to bother you, Nadine said. My name is Nadine Ferris. I work at a senior residence in Briarfield, Indiana. I found your card in the belongings of a resident here, a Mrs. Eleanor Brennan. There was a silence on the line, long enough that Nadine thought the call had dropped. Say that name again, the man said, quietly now, the gruffness gone out of his voice entirely. Eleanor Brennan, Nadine said. Everyone calls her Nora. Another silence. Then, in a voice gone flat and careful, the kind of voice a man uses when he's deliberately not letting himself feel something yet, General Kessler said, Colonel Brennan is in a nursing home. Yes, sir. Give me the address, he said. I'm coming out there. Nadine brought me the envelope that afternoon, sealed exactly as I'd left it. She told me about the call in a low voice, checking my blood pressure. The cuff tightened around my arm, as if the room needed something ordinary to hold on to while she talked. He said he's coming out here, she said. General Kessler. He didn't ask if that was all right. He just said he was coming. I hadn't spoken to Ray Kessler in almost 4 years, not since Ray's funeral. He'd stood at attention through the whole service, in a uniform 2 sizes too big for the man he'd become. Afterward, he gripped both my hands and told me one thing. If I ever needed anything at all, I was to call him directly. No assistant, no message left with a secretary. Him. I had never called. 30 years of not asking for help does not undo itself just because a man offers. I held the envelope in my lap a long while that evening before I finally opened it. Dale had told me to wait. But a general was already driving toward Briarfield because a stranger had found his card in a Bible. I decided some things could no longer wait for permission. Inside was a single folded letter. Beneath it, legal documents stapled together. A deed. A trust agreement dated 8 years back. A smaller card clipped to the top, in Dale's own handwriting from years ago. A note to himself. Filed, recorded, County Clerk's Office, Book 214, page 6. I read Ray's letter first. Nora, if you're reading this, then Greg came for the house, the way I always worried he might. Not out of cruelty, out of desperation. That boy has never once in his life learned the difference between owing and taking. I want you to know I saw it coming, years before either of us wanted to admit it. So I did the only thing a careful man knows how to do. I moved the house into a trust. Your name only. His name is written into that trust exactly once, and it's written in the clause that keeps him out of it. You built this life beside me for 30 years, in uniform and out of it. And nobody, not our son, not a bank, not a judge who's never met either of us, gets to tell you what that life is worth. Don't ever let anyone tell you what it's worth. Love, Ray. I sat with that letter a long time before I set it down. Nadine, who had stayed in the room out of what I think was simple decency, asked quietly if I was all right. He knew, I said. 8 years ago. He knew this was coming. Knew what was coming? That our son would eventually try to take something that was never his to take. I folded the letter carefully back along its original creases, the way you fold something you intend to keep for the rest of your life. Ray put the house in a trust. My name only. Greg's name appears exactly once in the clause that locks him out. Nadine sat down slowly in the chair by the window. Then the Callaway loan, she said, the one secured against your house, was never his to pledge, I said. He borrowed $41,000 against a house he never owned, not for one day since 2015. It should have felt like triumph hearing myself say that out loud for the first time. It didn't. It felt like grief wearing a disguise, the particular kind of grief that shows up 8 years late to a conversation you never got to finish with the person who tried hardest to protect you. Ray had known his own son well enough to plan for this. He never once told me. Telling me would have meant admitting what kind of man Greg had become. Ray was never a man who enjoyed saying hard things before he had to. I called Dale that night from the hallway phone. I read him the trust language, word for word, my finger tracing the line as I spoke it into the receiver. I could hear him writing on the other end, the scratch of a pen, moving fast. This is close to everything we need, Dale said. The Callaway pledge is void the moment this trust document sees daylight. Greg pledged an asset he never held title to. That's not a paperwork error, Nora. Depending on what he told the lender, that's fraud. I want to sit with it a day before I file anything. I want it airtight before we move. What happens to him? That depends on what you want to happen to him, Dale said carefully. I thought about that question longer than I expected to. I thought about Greg as a boy, 7 years old, standing at the airport gate every single time Ray or I came home from a deployment, holding a hand-drawn sign, "Welcome home" in crooked crayon letters. The O in home always a little lopsided, no matter how many times he redrew it. I thought about the man he'd become since, thin-voiced, desperate, willing to forge his own mother's signature rather than simply ask her for help. Somewhere between that boy and this man, something had broken in him. I hadn't caught it in time to fix it. No trust document was going to repair that particular damage. I don't want him in prison, I said finally. I want the truth to stop hiding. That's all. Let the county do whatever the county does with a forged pledge. I'm not asking for more than that. Dale was quiet a moment. That's more mercy than most people would offer, he said. It isn't mercy, I said. It's accuracy. I'm not interested in punishing him past what the facts require. I never have been. I did not sleep well that night. Not because I doubted what I'd decided. Deciding it made the whole thing real. It hadn't been real before. Just a suspicion, carried quietly around a nursing home hallway. I lay in the narrow bed in room 14 and listened to the building settle. Pipes ticking. Someone's television murmuring 2 doors down. I thought about how strange it was. The safest I had felt in 3 weeks was inside a place my own son had put me, to make me disappear. Wednesday morning, an aide brought breakfast on a tray. Oatmeal, a small carton of orange juice. She set it down with the same gentle, distracted kindness she showed every resident on that hall. Her name was Priya Bansal, 26, in her second year on the floor. She had a habit of talking while she worked, one most residents found either comforting or exhausting, depending on the day. You've got a visitor list of exactly one person, Colonel, she said, glancing at the clipboard she carried everywhere. Your son, nobody else in 6 weeks. That's the shortest list I've seen since I started here. I don't have much family left to visit, I said. No friends? Neighbors? I thought of Carol Whitfield, 2 doors down on Hartwell Road. 30 years she'd known me. She had never once in all that time learned I'd worn a uniform. I never gave her reason to ask. A few, I said. They don't know I'm here yet. Priya frowned at that. The same small frown Nadine had given her clipboard the first night. Somebody should know where you are, she said. That's not really my business to say, but somebody should. She was right, though I didn't tell her so. I made a note in the green ledger that morning, a short one. Nobody outside Dale knows where I am. Fix that. Underneath it, a second line. Carol W. Call when phone charges past 9. I called Carol that night. She picked up on the second ring. When I told her where I was, there was a silence on her end, almost as long as the one Nadine had gotten from General Kessler. He put you in Fairhaven, Carol said, without telling me, without telling anybody on this road. He didn't want anybody telling me things I hadn't figured out on my own, I said, or telling anybody else where I'd gone. Nora, I've lived across the street from you for 31 years, Carol said. I didn't even know you'd served until that lockbox went up on your door. I called the number, just to ask what in the world was happening. The realtor let it slip your son had power of attorney. I still don't understand half of this. Neither did I 3 weeks ago, I said. I'm starting to now. What do you need from me? Nothing yet, I said. Just knowing you know is enough for tonight. If anything happens to me in here that doesn't look right, you're the one who calls someone. You're scaring me a little, Nora. Good, I said. That means you're paying attention. Greg visited that same Wednesday afternoon, 2 days before a ceremony neither of us yet knew was coming. He arrived cheerful, almost boyish. He carried a small box of the peppermint candies I used to keep in a dish on the kitchen counter when he was small, as if peppermints could undo 3 weeks of forged signatures. Hearing's set for next Tuesday, he said, settling into the chair by my bed like a man discussing the weather. The competency evaluation. Dr. Aldrich is very thorough. You'll like him. I'm sure I will, I said. It's just a formality at this point, he said. Once it's done, I can handle things properly. The house, the accounts, all of it. You won't have to worry about the details anymore. What details exactly? I said. He waved a hand. The same easy gesture he'd used his whole life to wave away questions he didn't want to answer fully. Just paperwork, he said. Financial things. It's a lot for anyone to manage alone, especially at your age. I managed a battalion's worth of paperwork for 30 years, Greg, I said. I think I can manage my own checkbook. Something flickered behind his eyes. There and gone so fast I might have imagined it, if I hadn't spent 3 decades learning to read faces across a briefing table. Sure, he said. Sure, Mom. I just want to help. I let him keep talking. He told me about a buyer already interested in Hartwell Road, a young couple relocating from Indianapolis. Cash offer, quick close, no contingencies. He said it the way a man says something he's rehearsed, smooth, a little too fast. I understood then. The house wasn't a future plan for him. It was already listed. He mentioned an asking price, $310,000, a number he clearly already knew by heart. The way you know a number you've been counting on to save you. He had already changed the locks 2 days earlier. I only learned it because Carol Whitfield had called Fairhaven's front desk to ask if I was all right. A man she didn't recognize had been in and out of my house all week, a realtor's lockbox screwed into my own front door handle. I did not tell him she'd already called me directly. I let him think his secrets were still secrets. A man who believes he's still hidden keeps talking, and a man who keeps talking keeps handing you rope. I did not tell Greg I knew about the locks. I let him leave that afternoon still believing his plan was moving exactly as designed. A competency hearing on Tuesday, a closing not far behind it. His mother's whole life quietly folded up and handed over before she understood what had happened to it. He had no way of knowing a former commanding general already had a phone number he'd dialed the day before. That Dale Pruitt had already begun drafting an emergency motion to flag the Callaway lien pending review. That a trust document sitting in my nightstand drawer, book 214, page 6, made his entire plan worth exactly nothing, from the forged signature to the realtor's lockbox. Thursday, Dale called the hallway phone himself, something he rarely did, out of some old-fashioned courtesy about a client's time. I filed the emergency notice this morning, he said. The recorder's office has the trust on record now, cross-referenced against the Callaway lien. It's flagged. That doesn't undo the loan by itself, but it puts First Meridian on notice. The collateral they think they're holding isn't real collateral. And Greg doesn't know. Greg doesn't know, Dale said. Nora, I have to ask you something. I want you to think about it honestly before you answer. Are you certain you don't want to call the sheriff's office? What he did, forging a consent form, filing false paperwork, that's not a family disagreement. That's a crime. Whatever your intentions are afterward. I looked out the small window at the flat brown fields, the same fields I'd looked at every day since I arrived. Fields that had never once asked me who I used to be. I've made my decision, Dale, I said. The county can do what the county does, once the facts are in the open. I'm not going to be the one who calls it in on my own son, but I'm also not going to protect him. Not from what happens once the truth is sitting in plain daylight. That's a fine line, Dale said. I've walked finer ones, I said. 30 years of them. Thursday night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the small desk in my room, the green ledger open. For the first time since I'd started keeping it decades ago, I wrote something that wasn't a number. I wrote, I don't want revenge. I want the truth to stop hiding. There is a difference, and I intend to remember it tomorrow, no matter how satisfying the other thing might feel in the moment. I read that sentence back twice before I closed the ledger. Somewhere down the hall, past midnight, I heard Nadine's voice, low and steady, on the phone at the nurse's station. I couldn't make out the words, but I recognized the rhythm. Someone confirming logistics, times, an arrival. The same rhythm I'd used 100 times, coordinating a convoy's departure. I didn't ask her about it in the morning. I didn't need to. Some things you simply feel arriving before anyone tells you they're on the way. The way you feel weather change in an old wound. Friday morning came in gray and quiet, the kind of overcast Indiana sky that makes the whole flat landscape look like a held breath. I dressed early, in my own clothes, not the uniform. I did not yet know what the morning held. I have never once in my life put on dress blues before I understood the occasion. Nadine came to my door just after 9, her clipboard nowhere in sight, for once, her hands empty and a little restless at her sides. "There's a car outside," she said. "Just one. A man's asking for you by rank. He says his name is Kessler." I felt something settle in my chest that I hadn't expected. Something between relief and a kind of old, careful dread. The way you feel when a superior officer arrives in person instead of sending word. A man like Ray Kessler does not drive 3 hours on a Friday for small matters. He was waiting in the small visiting room off the main hallway, alone, in civilian clothes, a plain gray sedan parked crooked in a visitor spot outside. He looked older than I remembered, silver through what hair he had left, but he still stood the way he'd always stood, spine straight, weight balanced. A man who had spent so many decades at attention, his body had simply stopped remembering how to slouch. "Colonel," he said, and took both my hands the way he had at Ray's funeral. "I got here as fast as I could, once I understood what I was hearing." "You didn't have to come," I said. "I know," he said. "That's not why I came." He sat across from me and asked me to tell him everything. I did, in the plain, sequenced way I've always given a report. The intake form, the forged date, the guardianship filing, the Callaway loan, Ray's letter, the trust. He listened without interrupting, the way a good officer listens to a subordinate's account before deciding on a course of action. When I finished, he sat back and was quiet for a long moment. His jaw worked slightly, the way it used to before he issued an order he didn't enjoy giving. "There's something I owe you," he said finally. "Separate from all this, and I don't want the two things tangled together in your mind. So hear this part first. Your Legion of Merit citation got lost in a records transfer when the unit reorganized after your retirement. I found it 18 months ago, going through old files. I've been meaning to make it right ever since. I was going to mail it to you with an apology letter. Now that I'm standing here, mailing it feels like an insult." "When would you do it properly?" I said. "I could have a small detail here within the week," he said. "It won't be large. A citation reading, a salute, nothing theatrical. But I'd like your permission before I set a date. It's your ceremony, not mine." I thought about Tuesday, about the competency hearing Greg believed was still his quiet, private plan. I thought about a room full of people, calling me a lonely old lady for 3 weeks, deciding my fate without once asking me a real question. "What day were you thinking?" I said. "I could have it arranged for Tuesday morning," he said. "Here, if the administrator allows it. Early, before whatever else is scheduled that day." Something went still and sharp inside me. The particular stillness that comes right before you commit fully to a plan you've only half formed until that exact second. "Tuesday's the hearing," I said. "The competency evaluation Greg filed for. Set for the county courthouse, 1 in the afternoon." Ray Kessler's face did not change, not obviously. But I had spent 30 years learning to read the smallest shift in a commanding officer's expression. I saw it settle into something quiet and dangerous. "Then perhaps," he said, "the ceremony belongs at the courthouse instead of here, before the hearing starts. In the hallway, if nowhere else is available." I have never once in my career let a courtroom intimidate me. I don't intend to start today. "You do that," I said. "Drive a detail to a county courthouse in Indiana for a woman you haven't spoken to in 4 years. "Nora," he said, and something in his voice cracked just slightly. the first crack I'd heard in it since he arrived. I have spent 30 years learning which soldiers under my command would still be standing at the end of the worst day of their lives. You were always at the top of that list. I am not driving out here for a stranger. I am driving out here because somebody let a stranger find my card in a Bible before I ever thought to check on you myself. That is a failure that belongs to me, not to you. I did not have an answer for that, not right away. I sat with it, the way I sit with numbers in the green ledger that don't balance the first time through, until the discomfort of it settles into something useful. Tuesday, I said finally, at the courthouse, before the hearing. He nodded once. The decision made the way decisions are made by men who have spent their careers making them fast and living with the consequences slower. I'll need Dale Pruitt's number, he said. If there's paperwork moving on your side of this, I want our timing to line up with his. I gave it to him. Before he left, he took both my hands again, the same grip he'd used at Ray's funeral, held them a moment longer than the gesture required. For what it's worth, he said, and I know it isn't much, given everything. I'm sorry it took a stranger finding my card for me to know you needed anyone at all. You should have called me the day this started. I don't call people for help, Ray, I said. Never have. I know, he said. That's the whole problem with people like us. I called Dale that afternoon and told him everything. For the first time since this had all begun, I heard something close to relief in his voice. The tight, careful relief of a lawyer just handed a piece of leverage he didn't know how to ask for. A ceremony at the courthouse steps, right before the hearing, Dale said slowly, turning it over. Nora, that's not just sentiment. That's timing a judge can't ignore. Half the courthouse watches a 2-star general salute you in the hallway, 10 minutes before Greg's lawyer calls you incompetent. That petition dies before it's even read into the record. That's not why I said yes, I said. I know it isn't, Dale said, but it doesn't hurt that it'll also work that way. The days between Friday and Tuesday moved slower than any 3 days I could remember. Slower even than the long nights waiting for convoy reports during my second deployment. When time seemed to fold in on itself, the closer you got to knowing whether the people you loved had made it through. I kept to my routine at Fairhaven, breakfast at 7, the green ledger at my little desk, a walk down the hallway when my knees allowed it. I let Greg believe, every time he called or visited, that nothing at all had changed since he'd last seen me. He visited once more before Tuesday, on Sunday afternoon. This time he brought his daughter, my granddaughter Emily, 9 years old. She climbed onto the foot of my bed, the way she used to climb onto our porch swing on Hartwell Road. She told me about a school project on state birds, about a friend named Delaney who had a new puppy, the breathless, uninterrupted way children tell you things. I let myself enjoy those 20 minutes completely, without letting a single thought of Tuesday intrude on them. Some things deserve to be kept separate from the rest of a war, even a quiet one fought with paperwork instead of rifles. When Emily went to find a vending machine down the hall with Nadine, Greg lingered a moment at the door. You seem different this week, he said, calmer almost. I thought you'd be more upset about Tuesday. I've made my peace with a great many things in my life, Greg, I said. Tuesday will be what it will be. He studied me a moment longer than I liked, the same careful arithmetic I'd seen on his face the day of the intake, a man sensing something shift beneath him without yet understanding the shape of it. You're not planning something, he said. It wasn't quite a question. I'm 71 years old and living in a nursing home you put me in, I said. What exactly would I be planning? He didn't have an answer for that. He left without pressing further, though I noticed, watching from my window. He sat in his car in the parking lot a long moment before he finally started the engine. The particular stillness of a man arguing with a doubt he doesn't want to name out loud. Monday night, Dale called one final time. "Everything's ready," he said. "The trust, the recorder's confirmation, the fraud referral to First Meridian. General Kessler's detail is set to arrive at the courthouse at 12:30, 30 minutes before the hearing. I'll meet you there at noon. And if the judge won't allow the ceremony inside the building," I said. "Then it happens on the steps," Dale said, "where every reporter and every clerk on their lunch break can watch it happen. Either way, Nora, by 12:45 tomorrow, this county courthouse is going to know exactly who Greg Brennan tried to have declared incompetent." I did not sleep much that night either. A different kind of sleeplessness than the nights before. Less dread, more the sharp, humming alertness I remembered from the hours before a convoy rolled out, when there was nothing left to plan, and only the waiting remained. I took the green ledger out one last time before Tuesday, wrote a final line beneath the others. Tomorrow, the truth stops hiding. I intend to let it happen quietly and completely, and only once. Tuesday morning came in bright and cold, the kind of clear Indiana sky that makes a courthouse lawn look almost handsome. Frost still silvering the grass along the walkway. Nadine drove me herself, in her own car, a small gray sedan that smelled faintly of coffee and hand sanitizer. She talked the entire way about nothing in particular: weather, traffic, a recipe her mother used to make, the kind of talk people offer when they know silence would let the nerves in. "You don't have to do this," I told her, somewhere past the county line. "Drive me, I mean. You've already done more than your job asked of you." "My job asked me to check a box on an intake form," Nadine said. "Everything since then, I did because I wanted to. Don't take that away from me now." I helped her into the dress blues myself once we reached the courthouse parking lot, standing beside her car in the cold. My hands steadier on the buttons than they had any right to be, given how my heart was behaving underneath them. The fabric felt a little looser than it used to, ribbons pulling gently at cloth that had once fit differently, on a younger body doing younger work. But putting it on, it still felt like putting on the truth. The Fairview County Courthouse sat at the center of town, the way courthouses in towns like Briarfield always do. A squat limestone building, tall windows, a set of wide stone steps, a Civil War monument out front that most residents walked past 1,000 times without reading. Dale was waiting near the entrance when we arrived, his leather folder tucked under one arm. Beside him, unmistakable even from a distance, 4 black sedans idled at the curb, small flags mounted stiff on their front fenders in the cold morning air. "They're early," Dale said, checking his watch. 12:15. "Kessler doesn't like to arrive late to anything." "Neither do I," said. General Kessler stood beside the lead car in full dress uniform. 4 other officers stood near him, arranged so precise it looked less like a group of men, more like a single instrument waiting to be played. He saw me approaching on Nadine's arm and started forward himself, closing the distance faster than a man his age should have been able to move. For a moment, before either of us said a word, he simply looked at me. The way you look at someone you'd worried, quietly, you might have failed. "Colonel?" he said. "General?" I said. "Shall we do this on the steps?" he said. "Or would you rather wait for the hallway inside?" I looked up at the courthouse, at the tall windows and the wide stone steps and the small knots of people already gathering on the lawn. Clerks on an early lunch. A reporter from the county paper who covered anything unusual enough to fill a Wednesday page. A handful of townspeople, drawn by the same instinct that draws anyone toward a column of uniforms in an unfamiliar place. "The steps," I said. "Let everyone see it who wants to." Greg's car pulled into the courthouse lot at 12:28, 2 minutes before the hour he'd been told to arrive. He parked it crooked in his hurry, the way he had at Fairhaven the day the first honor detail arrived. Clearly having been told nothing about what was waiting for him, he got out slowly, staring at the row of black sedans and the small mounted flags, his phone halfway to his ear before he thought better of it and put it away. The same gesture I remembered from that first ceremony 3 weeks earlier. Beside him, stepping out of the passenger side, was a man I didn't recognize. Younger, in a gray suit that fit a little too well, carrying a slim briefcase. I understood without needing to be told. This was the attorney Greg had hired to argue his mother into incompetence in front of a judge. Greg's eyes found me on the steps, in dress blues, flanked by a 2-star general and 4 officers standing at parade rest. I watched from 30 feet away, the exact moment the ground shifted beneath him for the second time in 3 weeks. "Mom," he said, loud enough to carry across the lawn. "What is this? What are you doing?" I did not answer him directly. I let General Kessler answer for the both of us, the way officers of his rank have always answered questions that aren't really questions at all, challenges dressed up as curiosity. "Mr. Brennan," Kessler said, his voice carrying easily across the courthouse lawn without needing to be raised. "I understand you have a hearing scheduled for 1 o'clock. Before that hearing begins, there is a matter of overdue Army business that takes precedence. I intend to see it handled properly in front of whatever witnesses happen to be present." The gray-suited attorney leaned toward Greg and said something too quiet to carry. Greg shook his head once, sharp. The gesture of a man trying to wave away something he doesn't yet understand well enough to argue against. Dale stepped forward then, leather folder still under one arm. He addressed the small, growing crowd, the same mild, unhurried tone he used for reading wills. "Nothing about this delays the 1 o'clock hearing," he said. "This will take 15 minutes. I'd ask everyone to give the general the courtesy of quiet while he does what he came here to do." The crowd on the lawn had grown to perhaps 30 people by then, drawn the way crowds always are, by uniforms and stillness, by the particular electricity of something important about to happen in public. A woman I recognized as the courthouse clerk stood near the door with her hand pressed flat against her chest. The reporter from the county paper had his notepad out already, pen moving. General Kessler turned to face me and came to attention, so sharp and so total that the entire crowd seemed to go still at once. 30 strangers, holding their breath in unison, on a cold courthouse lawn, in a town most had lived in their whole lives. None of them had ever witnessed anything like what was about to happen. "Colonel Eleanor Brennan," he said. His voice, though not raised, reached every corner of that lawn, the way a voice only reaches when it belongs to a man who has spent decades giving orders. Across parade grounds, across battlefields. He had long since stopped needing to shout to be heard. "On behalf of the United States Army, and by the authority vested in me, I am here to present the Legion of Merit, a decoration long overdue, for exceptional meritorious service across 30 years of distinguished duty, including Combat Logistics Command, during 2 deployments in defense of this nation." He raised his hand in a salute so crisp it looked carved from a single motion, and held it. Nobody on that lawn breathed for a second, not one person. The 4 officers behind him snapped to the same salute in unison, 4 hands rising like one hand. Somewhere in the small crowd, I heard someone, a stranger, a townsperson who had simply stopped to watch, a small sound that might have been a gasp. I returned the salute. My hand did not shake. 30 years teaches you that, if nothing else. Whatever else has been taken from you in a given week, Your hand does not shake when it matters. Not in front of 30 strangers on a courthouse lawn. Not in front of your own son standing frozen beside a lawyer he'd hired to call you incapable. At ease, I said quietly. General Kessler lowered his hand, though the crowd did not relax the way at ease usually asks a crowd to relax. It stayed exactly as tight as it had been. Everyone on that lawn had watched it. Clerks, strangers, a reporter with his pen still moving. 20 minutes earlier, I'd been a woman in the passenger seat of a plain gray sedan. Now I'd just received a salute from a 2-star general in front of the county courthouse. Greg had gone very pale. He took 2 steps toward me, away from his attorney, the gray-suited man reaching after him a half-second too late. "Colonel," he said, the word landing on his tongue like it might dissolve if he pressed too hard on it. "You never told me you were a—" "You never asked," I said, my voice steady, carrying the same distance Kessler's had carried a moment earlier. "Not once, in 44 years, did you ask your mother what she did for 30 years of her life. You asked me about the deed. You asked me if I got confused about dates. You never once asked what I carried." The lawn was silent enough that I could hear a car passing 2 blocks away, a dog barking somewhere behind the courthouse. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary Tuesday, continuing around a moment that felt, to me, anything but ordinary. His attorney cleared his throat and stepped forward, glancing at his watch. The particular anxiety of a man realizing his entire strategy has just been detonated in a public square, 11 minutes before he was due in a courtroom. "Mr. Brennan," he said quietly, "perhaps we should step inside and discuss." "There's nothing to discuss that shouldn't be said right here," Dale said, cutting him off, his voice mild but immovable. "We're all gathered. This hearing concerns my client directly. There's a piece of paperwork this family, and frankly, this town, needs to hear read aloud before anyone sets foot in that courtroom." Greg's eyes moved from Dale to me and back again. I watched something in his face begin to understand, half a second before his mind caught up to it. Whatever he'd planned for 1 o'clock had already stopped mattering. "Mom, what is this?" he said again, quieter now, the performance gone entirely out of his voice. "This is the truth," I said. "It's been waiting 8 years for the right lawn to say it on." The gray-suited attorney tried once more. "Your Honor isn't even present," he said, a note of strain in his voice now. The strain of a man who had prepared for a courtroom and found himself instead on a lawn full of witnesses he hadn't accounted for. "This isn't the appropriate venue for—" "It's a public sidewalk," Dale said. "Every one of these documents is already a matter of public record, filed with the county recorder's office 3 days ago. I'm not disclosing anything that isn't already sitting in a file cabinet 200 feet from where we're standing. I'm simply saving the judge the trouble of reading it into the record herself in 20 minutes. The attorney looked at Greg, a look that asked a question Greg didn't seem able to answer. Then he looked back at Dale. The particular resignation of a man realizing the case had changed shape. It was no longer the case he'd been hired to win. "Go ahead," Greg said quietly. Something in the way he said it, defeated rather than defiant, told me he already suspected what was coming. Dale opened the leather folder, lifted a single page, held it so the cold winter light caught it clearly. He began to read. "The Hartwell Road property, recorded book 214, page 6, Fairview County, is held in an irrevocable trust established the 14th of April, 8 years past, naming Eleanor Ray Brennan as sole trustee and sole beneficiary during her lifetime. No other party, including but not limited to any child of the grantor, shall hold any right, title, interest, or authority to encumber, pledge, sell, or otherwise transfer said property, under any circumstance, for any reason, without the express written consent of the sole trustee. He paused there, letting the lawn sit with it. The reporter's pen moving fast now, the small crowd leaning in, the particular way crowds lean when they sense they're watching something, something that will still be talked about at dinner tables that night. Then he looked up at Greg over the top of his reading glasses. "That means," Dale said, "the deed you pledged to Callaway Holdings 3 months ago, as collateral against a construction loan, was never yours to pledge. It hasn't been yours, or partly yours, or yours in any legal sense, since April of 8 years ago. Your father made certain of that before he died." Greg's mouth opened and closed once without producing a sound. "That's not," he started, then stopped, then started again, his voice dropping until only those closest could hear it clearly. "That loan officer never asked me to prove ownership beyond the tax records. The tax records still list Mom's name and mine both, from the old joint filing years back. I didn't think—" "You didn't think anyone would check?" I said, my voice steady, carrying across the lawn the way it needed to. "You didn't think I'd check. You thought a woman about to be declared incompetent wouldn't be in a position to check anything ever again. Not by a judge you'd already arranged the evaluation for." The lawn had gone very still. The courthouse clerk near the door had both hands pressed to her chest now. Somewhere behind me, I heard Nadine make a small sound, quickly swallowed. "I was going to pay it back," Greg said, his voice cracking on the last word. A crack I hadn't heard since he was a teenager, caught in a lie too large for him to carry gracefully. Once the development sold, once things turned around, I was going to fix all of it. Nobody was going to lose anything, I swear, Mom. Nobody was going to. "Nobody except me," I said. "I was going to lose my house, my name, my own competency in the eyes of a judge. Also, a project you never told me was failing could limp along another quarter. You didn't come here to ask your mother for help, Greg. You came here to take what you needed and make sure I couldn't object when you did." He didn't answer that. There wasn't, I think, an answer available to him. Not one that wouldn't have made things worse. Not in front of 30 witnesses, and a reporter who was, I noticed, already photographing the leather folder in Dale's hands. General Kessler spoke then, his voice quieter than it had been during the ceremony, but no less carrying across that cold lawn. "Son," he said, "I've spent 30-some years watching soldiers make hard calls under pressure. Desperate men do desperate things. That's not new to me. But there is a difference between a hard call and this. What you did to your mother wasn't desperate. It was calculated. And it very nearly worked. It worked because you were counting on the one thing that should have protected her, instead being used against her. Her age, her quiet. Nobody in this town, but her own late husband, ever bothered to ask what she'd done with 30 years of her life. "I didn't mean—" Greg started. "You forged a signature," Dale said flatly, cutting him off, still holding the folder open. "You backdated a consent form. You filed a guardianship petition based on a competency claim you knew to be false. Any one of those, on its own, is a serious problem for you. Together, in front of this many witnesses, they're considerably worse." 10 minutes before a scheduled hearing, I watched my son's face go through several stages in quick succession. Defiance, then fear, then something that looked finally almost like the boy who used to stand at the airport gate holding a crooked crayon sign. It did not erase what he'd done. Nothing erases that. But it reminded me, the man standing in front of that courthouse, cornered and pale in front of half the town, had once been someone I loved without complication, before complication found him on its own and made itself at home. "What happens now?" Greg asked. To no one in particular. or maybe to all of us at once. Now, Dale said, the recorder's office has already been notified of the fraudulent lien. That happened Thursday, before any of us knew this ceremony was coming. First Meridian's compliance office has the same notice, along with a formal fraud referral. What they choose to do with that is between them, the bank, and whatever attorney you retain going forward. But your competency petition is still on today's docket, Greg. A filed petition doesn't simply disappear because the family agrees privately it should. A judge has to hear it withdrawn. On the record, in open court, same as she would have heard it granted. In front of the judge, Greg repeated, the words landing on him like a second, slower blow. Publicly. After all this. In front of the judge, Dale said. Publicly. That's how it has to unwind, same as it was filed. The gray-suited attorney had gone very quiet, standing a little apart from Greg now. The particular distance a hired professional puts between himself and a client whose case has just become something closer to a liability than a fee. I understood, watching him, that whatever conversation they were about to have inside that courthouse would not be one Greg enjoyed. Greg looked at me. For the first time since he'd walked onto that lawn, his voice dropped the last of its performance entirely. The ease and the rehearsed warmth gone out of it completely. Are you going to press charges? He said. Personally, I mean? Against me. I thought about that question the way I'd thought about it days earlier, in the hallway with Dale on the phone, turning it over slowly, checking it from every angle, the way you check a supply manifest before you sign off on it. 30 strangers and a reporter and a general and my son all waiting on a cold lawn for my answer. No, I said. I'm not interested in punishing you past what the facts already require. The county will do what the county does. The bank will do what the bank does. That's not my decision to make, and it never was. But I want you to hear this clearly, Greg, because I am only going to say it once. And I am going to say it in front of everyone standing here. 3 weeks ago, you decided a stranger at a counter had more right to know what kind of mother I was. More right than I did. The lawn waited. General Kessler waited, still at parade rest beside me. Nadine, somewhere behind my shoulder, had gone very still. You called me a lonely old lady in front of a stranger, I said, because it was easier than admitting you needed help, easier than admitting you were ashamed to ask for it honestly. I have been many things in my life. I have commanded convoys through places more dangerous than you will ever have to imagine. I have signed for equipment worth more than this entire courthouse. I buried your father with my own hands steady the whole time, because that is what 30 years teaches a person to do with grief. You carry it upright. I have never, not for one day of my life, been lonely in the way you meant that word. I was simply quiet, and you mistook my quiet for something you could take advantage of. I let that sit on the lawn for a moment, the way General Kessler had let his salute sit before lowering it. I don't get loud, I said. I get accurate. And the accurate truth is that I love you, and I am deeply disappointed in you. Both of those things are allowed to be true in the same sentence, at the same time, without canceling each other out. Greg's eyes were wet now. To his credit, he did not try to hide it. He did not wipe it away in front of the crowd. I'm sorry, he said. I don't know if that means anything right now, but I am. It means something, I said. It doesn't fix anything yet, but it means something. General Kessler stepped forward and placed a small velvet box in my hands. The citation folded neatly inside, beside the medal itself. He closed my fingers gently around it, the way you'd close a child's hand around something fragile and important. Colonel, he said, I am sorry it took this long. I am sorry it took this kind of morning to bring it to you properly, but I am glad, for whatever it's worth, that I was the one standing here when it finally happened. It's worth quite a lot, I said, more than you probably realize. The courthouse bells struck the half hour then, 12:30, carrying flat and clear across the lawn. Dale closed his folder with the quiet finality of a man who knows a meeting has run its natural course. The hearing's in 30 minutes, he said. Nora, you don't have to go inside if you'd rather not. I can represent your position to the judge without you present. I'll go in, I said. I've never once in my life let someone else finish a fight I started. The Fairview County courtroom smelled the way small-town courtrooms always smell. Old wood polish, radiator heat, the particular hush of a room built for other people's worst days. Judge Miriam Castellano presided. A woman in her 50s, steel gray hair pulled back tight, reading glasses worn low on her nose. The kind of judge who had clearly heard every excuse a family could invent, long before Greg's attorney ever opened his mouth. The gray-suited attorney, whose name I learned was Mr. Holloway, stood when the case was called. He asked with visible discomfort for a brief moment to consult with his client before proceeding. Judge Castellano granted it, watching over her glasses as Holloway leaned close to Greg at the defense table. He spoke in a low, urgent voice. I couldn't hear it, but I didn't need to, given what I'd already watched unfold on the courthouse lawn 20 minutes earlier. When Holloway rose again, his voice had lost whatever confidence he'd carried into the building. Your Honor, he said, my client wishes to withdraw the petition for guardianship at this time. Judge Castellano took off her glasses slowly. The gesture of a woman who has learned that silence gets more honest answers than questions do. Withdraw it, she said. After 3 separate filings from your office over the past 2 weeks, insisting this matter was urgent. Counselor, I'll need more than that from you before I close this docket entry. There have been developments, Holloway said carefully, that make the petition in its current form no longer appropriate. What developments? Judge Castellano said. Dale rose from where he sat beside me in the gallery. Your Honor, if the court will allow, I represent Mrs. Brennan's interests in this matter. I can summarize the developments briefly for the record. Judge Castellano studied him a moment, then nodded. Go ahead, counselor. Dale laid it out plainly, the way he'd laid it out for me weeks earlier above the hardware store. The trust recorded 8 years prior, the forged consent form at Fairhaven. The Callaway loan, pledged against a property Greg had no legal claim to since 2015. The recorder's office notification. The pending fraud referral to First Meridian's Compliance Division. He spoke without heat, without theater, the same mild, unhurried tone he'd used on the courthouse lawn. I watched Judge Castellano's expression sharpen with each new fact. The particular sharpening of a judge realizing the petition in front of her was never about a mother's competency at all. Mr. Holloway, Judge Castellano said when Dale finished, did you have any knowledge of this trust or this loan at the time you filed this petition? Holloway hesitated, glancing once at Greg beside him. No, Your Honor. I was not made aware of either matter. Mr. Brennan, Judge Castellano said, turning her attention directly to Greg for the first time. Were you aware, when you filed for guardianship over your mother, that the property in your petition was held in an irrevocable trust? A trust that excluded you by name? Greg stood slowly. In the small silence before he answered, I understood something. This was the moment. Not the salute, not the courthouse lawn. This exact question in this exact room would decide what kind of man he chose to be going forward. Yes, Your Honor, he said quietly. I was aware. A murmur moved through the small gallery. Court staff. the handful of townspeople who'd followed the proceedings in from the lawn, the reporter's pen scratching fast in the back row. Then the petition before this court, Judge Castellano said, was filed on a basis the petitioner knew to be materially false. In connection with a competency claim, this court now has significant reason to question the good faith of entirely. The petition for guardianship is dismissed with prejudice. I am also referring the matter of the falsified consent form to the county prosecutor's office for review, separate from whatever action the recorder's office or First Meridian's compliance division chooses to pursue regarding the loan itself. Mr. Brennan, I would strongly encourage you to retain separate counsel for that matter specifically. The gavel came down. A small, ordinary sound that seemed far too small for everything it had just settled. I did not feel triumph, sitting there in the gallery in my dress blues, a small velvet box still cupped in one hand. I felt mostly tired. The particular tiredness that comes after a long operation finally concludes. When you realize your body has been running on discipline alone for longer than you'd let yourself notice. Outside on the courthouse steps afterward, the crowd had mostly dispersed, drawn away by the ordinary business of a Tuesday afternoon. Though the reporter lingered, asking Dale a few careful questions I let him field on my behalf. General Kessler found me near the bottom of the steps, his officers already loading back into the sedans behind him. I have to get back, he said. There's a briefing in Washington I can't miss, even for this. But I want you to know, Colonel, if anything else comes of the criminal referral, if you need a character statement, a formal record of your service, anything at all, you call me directly. Not Nadine, not a stranger with my card. You. I will, I said. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I believed I actually might. He took my hand a final time, held it, and said quietly, so only I could hear it, "A salute isn't applause, Nora. It's a debt paid in silence. I've owed you this one a long time." Then he was gone. The column of black sedans pulling away from the curb in the same slow, deliberate line they'd arrived in. The courthouse lawn went back to being an ordinary lawn, in an ordinary Indiana county seat. Frost already melting off the grass in the early afternoon sun. Greg found me last, after Holloway had gathered his briefcase and left without another word to either of us. After Dale had gone to file the final paperwork with the clerk's office, he stood a few feet away, hands in his coat pockets, looking younger than his 44 years. Looking, if I'm honest, like the boy who used to lose his bicycle in our own driveway and never understand how it had happened. "What happens to the house now?" he asked. "The sale, I mean. The buyers." "There is no sale," I said. "There never was one you had the right to make. I'll be calling the realtor myself this week to cancel the listing. I expect the locks changed back within the day. On your dime, since you're the one who changed them without my consent in the first place." He nodded, accepting it the way a man accepts a sentence he already knows is fair. "And the loan, Callaway. What happens with that? That's between you, the bank, and whatever lawyer you find who isn't currently deciding whether representing you is worth the trouble," I said. "I've done what I came here to do, Greg. I'm not going to manage the rest of it for you. You're 44 years old. It's time you manage something yourself. Honestly, for once." He flinched at that, but he didn't argue with it. I think some small part of him was relieved, buried under 3 weeks of desperation and 8 years of financial trouble he'd never once shared with me. Relieved to finally be told plainly what he already knew. "I don't know how to fix this," he said. "Any of it. The money. Us. Neither do I yet," I said. "But I know it starts with you telling the truth to somebody besides a judge who forced it out of you. Start with your wife." Start with your children. See how that goes before you worry about the rest. Word of what had happened on the courthouse lawn reached Fairhaven before I did. By the time Nadine drove me back that afternoon, the whole staff seemed to already know. News travels through a small building faster than any official channel could carry it. Aide to aide, nurse to nurse. Even the kitchen staff serving dinner that evening kept glancing my way, a curiosity they were too polite to voice directly. Philip DeRoss, the administrator, found me in the hallway outside room 14 that evening, his usual nervous energy dialed up several notches further than I'd ever seen it. "Mrs. Brennan?" he said, then caught himself. "Colonel, I understand there were some significant developments today." "There were," I said. "I want you to know," he said, "that Fairhaven takes the integrity of our intake process extremely seriously. If there were any irregularities in how your admission was processed, we will be conducting a full internal review." "There were irregularities," I said. "A consent form backdated 3 weeks before I ever walked through your doors. A signature that wasn't mine. Nobody on your staff checked it against anything except my son's word that it was authentic. I'd suggest your review start there." He paled slightly, the particular pale of an administrator calculating liability in real time. "Of course," he said. "Of course. Please know that Nadine acted entirely outside any official capacity when Nadine acted like the only competent person in this building," I said, cutting him off, my voice even but leaving no room for argument. "If you discipline her for asking the right questions, you'll be hearing from my attorney directly. Everyone else in this building failed to ask them. And I promise you, Mr. DeRoss, he keeps better records than your intake office does." DeRoss did not discipline Nadine. Quite the opposite, I learned some weeks later. Dale mentioned in passing that Fairhaven's parent company had actually promoted her, moved her into a newly created compliance role, overseeing exactly the kind of admission irregularities that had nearly cost me my house, my name, and my freedom over one quiet, forgettable signature. I like to think some small part of that decision came from DeRoss wanting to be seen doing the right thing. Loudly enough that nobody asked too many questions about how close his building had come to enabling a fraud. I didn't much care what his motives were. I cared that Nadine ended up somewhere her instincts would matter to more people than just one overlooked colonel. Priya Bansal stopped by my room the night before. I finally packed my suitcase for the last time. The young aide who'd brought my breakfast that Wednesday morning, who'd asked why my visitor list held only one name, she stood in the doorway a moment, hesitant, before she spoke. "I looked you up," she admitted, "after everything happened. There's an old unit newsletter online, digitized from years back. There's a photograph of you in it, at some ceremony, standing next to men who all outranked everyone else in the room, except you." "I remember that photograph," I said. "I hated how I looked in it. Ray teased me about it for years." "I just wanted to say," Priya said, "that I'm sorry nobody here asked you a real question until Nadine did. I should have. I noticed things too. I just didn't trust myself enough to follow up on them." "You're 26, I said. "Trusting your own instincts is a skill you build slowly, the same way I built mine. Don't be too hard on yourself for not having 30 years of practice yet." She smiled at that. The particular relief of someone young being told plainly that a failure of nerve isn't the same thing as a failure of character. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Now that it's over, do you regret any of it? Letting it play out as long as it did, instead of just telling everyone who you were the first day?" I thought about that question longer than she probably expected me to. "No," I said finally. "If I'd announced my rank at that intake counter, Greg would have found some other angle. and I'd never have known the full shape of what he'd actually done. Letting it play out let the truth build its own case, brick by brick, until there was nothing left for him to argue against. That's not patience for its own sake. That's just how you win a fight you can't afford to lose twice. The morning I finally left Fairhaven for good, Nadine helped me carry my suitcase to Carol's waiting car. The same green ledger tucked inside it now, instead of hidden beneath folded clothes. No longer a thing I needed to conceal from anyone in that building. A few of the other residents came out to the front porch to see me off. An elderly man named Walt, who played checkers in the day room every afternoon. A widow named Frances, who'd shared a table with me at every meal. It surprised me more than it should have, given how quietly I'd tried to keep to myself the entire time. "You're the most interesting thing that's happened at this place in the 4 years I've lived here," Frances told me, gripping my hand at the car door. "Don't be a stranger, Colonel. Come back and visit an old woman who never got a courthouse lawn of her own." "I'll bring cards," I said. "We'll play something other than checkers." I meant it, and I kept the promise. Driving out to Fairhaven every few weeks that spring and summer to sit with Frances and Walt and share an hour of ordinary company. The kind of visiting I'd never once received from Greg in the 2 years before any of this began. The kind I found, somewhat to my own surprise, I now had patience for. More time than I'd expected a woman my age to have left in her. Nadine drove me back to Fairhaven that afternoon. For most of the ride, neither of us spoke. The radio turned low, some station playing something soft and forgettable. The flat brown field sliding past the window, the same way they had every day since I'd arrived. Except now I understood, finally, that I would not be looking at them from that particular window much longer. "You're leaving," she said, "somewhere past the county line." Not quite a question. "As soon as Dale finishes the paperwork," I said. There was never a valid basis for me to be there in the first place. Once the guardianship petition's off the docket and the consent form's been formally struck, there's nothing holding me at Fairhaven, except my own suitcase. "I'll miss having you on the hall," Nadine said. "Most residents don't teach me anything. You taught me to notice when a number doesn't add up." "You already noticed that," I said. "The first night, over an empty line on your clipboard. I just told you what you already knew how to see." She smiled at that, small and tired. The particular smile of a woman who has spent a long, strange 3 weeks doing something far outside her job description. Only now, driving home in the afternoon light, allowing herself to feel the weight of it. Wednesday morning, Dale called Fairhaven's front desk directly to say the paperwork was finished. The guardianship petition formally closed. The false consent form entered into the county prosecutor's referral, alongside a separate letter documenting the forged signature on the Callaway application. He'd also heard back, faster than either of us expected, from First Meridian's compliance office. They're opening a formal fraud review on the loan, Dale told me that afternoon, sitting across from me in the Fairhaven day room. One final time, before I packed my suitcase for good. Given the trust documentation, they're treating the collateral claim as void from origination. That means Greg's on the hook for the loan itself, unsecured now. No house behind it to make the bank feel better about the risk. Whatever payment plan he works out with them is going to be considerably less comfortable than the one he had back when he thought your house was backing it. "And Callaway Ridge?" I said. "The development itself." "Still failing as far as I can tell," Dale said. "That was never going to change, no matter what he did with your house. He was always going to lose that project, Nora. The only question was ever what else he was willing to lose along with it." I thought about that for a long moment, watching the perpetual television in the corner of the day room, still tuned to the same channel nobody remembered choosing. He chose to try to take me down with it, I said. That was the part he didn't have to choose. No, Dale agreed. He didn't. The county prosecutor's office called Dale 2 weeks later. They were declining to pursue criminal charges against Greg for the forged consent form. Given my own stated wishes, given the absence of any financial harm actually realized, since the guardianship petition had been dismissed before it could take effect, since the Callaway loan's collateral claim had been voided before any funds beyond the original advance changed hands. They noted, in the letter Dale forwarded to me, that they reserved the right to revisit the matter if further evidence of intent to defraud came to light. It was not forgiveness exactly. It was closer to a debt suspended rather than a debt forgiven. The kind of ledger entry I understood better than most people would, having kept one of my own for 30 years. Carol Whitfield helped me move back into the house on Hartwell Road on a Saturday morning in early April. The locks changed back properly this time, at Greg's expense, exactly as I'd told him they would be. She brought a casserole she hadn't been asked to bring, stayed longer than the unpacking required, sitting at my kitchen table, while I set the green ledger back in its usual spot. I hung the dress uniform, freshly cleaned, in the closet where it had always belonged. Not folded at the bottom of a suitcase, but hanging the way a life's work deserves to hang. I still can't believe I lived across the street from a colonel for 31 years, Carol said, watching me arrange things back into their proper places, and never once knew it. You knew everything that mattered, I said. You knew I brought soup when your husband was sick. You knew I watched your grandkids the summer your daughter was between jobs. The rank never had much to do with any of that. Maybe not, Carol said. But it explains a few things, like why you never once panicked during that ice storm in '09, when the rest of the street was calling the fire department over frozen pipes. Frozen pipes are considerably less alarming than what I used to deal with for a living, I said. Carol laughed, the first real laugh either of us had shared in the weeks since this had all begun. It felt, sitting at that table with the green ledger back where it belonged, almost like the world had righted itself onto its proper axis. Greg called me 3 days after I moved back home, his voice careful, uncertain. The voice of a man who has spent a long time deciding whether to make a call at all. I talked to Karen, he said, his wife, my daughter-in-law, a woman I had always liked more than I think Greg realized. About all of it. The loan, the house, Fairhaven, all of it. How did that go? I said. Badly, at first, he admitted. She's angrier than I've ever seen her. She took the kids to her sister's for a few days, but she also said, and I think she's right, that she'd rather be angry at the truth than comfortable with a lie. She wants to work through it if I'm willing to actually be honest going forward. With her and with everyone else. That sounds like a reasonable place to start, I said. I'm seeing a financial counselor, he said. Court-ordered, sort of. Part of working out the Callaway situation with the bank. But I would have needed one regardless. It's humbling, Mom. Sitting across from a stranger, explaining exactly how badly I mismanaged everything. Humility's not the worst thing that could happen to you at 44, I said. I'd rather you learn it this way than not learn it at all. There was a long pause on the line, the particular pause of a man working up to something he isn't sure he has the right to ask for anymore. Would it be all right, he said finally, if I brought Emily by this weekend, not to talk about any of it, just for her to see you? She's been asking. I'd like that, I said, and I meant it completely. Whatever Greg had done, whatever he still owed the county and the bank, none of that belonged to Emily. Neither did the slow, patient work it would take to rebuild trust with a wife who had every right to be furious with him. I was not about to let a 9-year-old girl lose her grandmother over her father's failures. He brought her that Saturday. She ran straight past him into my kitchen the moment the door opened, climbing onto the same chair she'd always claimed as hers, asking immediately whether I still had the good cookies, the ones with the chocolate chips instead of the raisins. For 20 minutes, I let myself simply be a grandmother again, uncomplicated, present. The ledger and the trust and the courthouse lawn set entirely aside. Greg stood in the doorway for most of it, not quite invited fully in yet, not quite banished either, watching his daughter and his mother the way a man watches something he came very close to losing through his own doing. "Thank you," he said quietly, when Emily finally wandered off to find the cat, "for not making her pay for what I did." "She never did anything," I said. "There was never a version of this where she'd have paid for it. You're the only one who gets to decide how long the rest of us pay for your choices, Greg. I'd suggest deciding that answer is as short as you can honestly make it." Karen called me herself, about a month after she'd taken the children to her sister's, before she and Greg had fully worked their way back to living under one roof again. I hadn't expected the call. I could hear, in the careful way she said my name, that it had cost her something to make it. "I owe you an apology," she said. "I should have called the day I found out what he'd done, not a month later. I was so angry at him I didn't know how to look at anyone connected to it, even you. Especially you, honestly, because some part of me wondered if you'd known all along and just let it happen." "I understand why you'd wonder that," I said, "but I didn't know the full shape of it until the same week you did. I only knew enough to start asking questions." "He told me everything," Karen said. "The loan, the forged signature, Fairhaven, all of it. No more half-truths. I made him write it down first, actually, every detail, before I'd even agree to talk to him about coming home. I wanted to see if his story matched what actually happened, instead of the version that made him look less foolish." "Did it match?" "Mostly," she said. "He left out how scared he was at first. That part came out later, when he stopped trying to explain and started just talking. I think that's the part that convinced me to give this another try. Not the explanation, the fear underneath it, once he finally let me see it plainly. Fear makes people do foolish, sometimes cruel things," I said. "It doesn't excuse what he did to me, but I understand it better than I did the week I signed that intake form." "I want the kids to still know you," Karen said. "Whatever happens with Greg and me, long term, I don't want any of this touching Emily or Ray Jr. more than it already has." "That's the one thing we agree on completely," I said, and I meant it. Greg and Karen were building something slow and uncertain between themselves, but the two children caught in the middle of it deserved a grandmother who showed up steady, unchanged, regardless of how their parents' marriage eventually settled. By late summer, Karen and Greg were living together again on Sycamore Lane. The modest rental they'd downsized into after Callaway Ridge finally collapsed into foreclosure, taking most of their savings down with it. It was a smaller life than the one Greg had been chasing for years. A rented house instead of the custom-built one he'd once shown me photographs of on his phone. A used sedan instead of the truck he'd traded in to make a loan payment. But it was, I thought, a considerably more honest life. I watched them host a small cookout that August, Emily and Ray Jr. chasing each other around a modest backyard. More honest than the one he'd been building on borrowed money and his mother's forged signature. "It's smaller," Greg admitted that afternoon, standing beside me near the grill while Karen supervised the children's water balloon fight from the porch steps. "Smaller than I ever wanted it to be. Smaller and honest beats large and borrowed every time," I said. "It took you 44 years to learn that lesson. I'd rather you learned it late than never at all." He was quiet a moment, watching his children shriek and scatter across the yard. I keep thinking about what you said on the courthouse lawn, he said, about never asking what you carried. I think about that almost every day now. And what have you decided to do about it? I said. Ask, he said simply. Karen, the kids, you. Ask instead of assume. It's a smaller habit than it sounds like, but it's the hardest one I've ever tried to build. It's also the only one that matters, I said. The rest tends to follow from it, given enough time and enough honesty. He nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he's decided to actually hold on to something instead of just agreeing with it out loud. Emily ran past us then, soaked from the water fight, laughing so hard she could barely breathe, and for a moment neither of us said anything else. We simply watched her go, the way you watch a good thing you almost lost, careful not to name it, careful just to let it be exactly what it was. Spring came slow to Briarfield that year, the way it always does in that part of Indiana, mud before green, a false warm week in March that fooled the daffodils into rising early, only to be caught by one last hard frost. I kept to my routine on Hartwell Road. Coffee at 7, the green ledger at the kitchen table, a walk down toward the grain elevator when my knees allowed it. Slowly, the particular ordinariness of my own life folded back around me, the way it does after any long deployment. Strange at first, then simply familiar again. Nadine called every few weeks, at first to check on paperwork loose ends, then simply because we'd become something like friends. An unlikely friendship, built in 3 strange weeks inside a building neither of us had wanted me to need. She told me on one of those calls in May that Fairhaven had changed one of its intake procedures since my stay. A new requirement. Any resident admitted under a family member's authority must have that authority verified against an actual power of attorney or guardianship order on file, not simply taken on the family's word. They named it after the review board that studied your case, she said. Not officially. Nobody's putting your name on a hallway plaque. But everyone on staff calls it the Brennan Protocol, quietly, when they're training somebody new. I didn't ask for that, I said. I know, Nadine said. That's usually how the good ones end up named. First Meridian's fraud review concluded in June. 4 months after that first courier delivered a statement I never should have received. The bank formally voided the Callaway Holdings loan's collateral claim, declared the remaining balance unsecured, referred the matter internally for further review of how the application had passed underwriting at all. With a signature nobody at the bank had apparently bothered to verify. Dale told me, with the particular satisfaction of a small-town lawyer watching a large institution finally do its job. 2 loan officers involved in approving the original advance were no longer employed there. Not by the time the review closed. Callaway Ridge, the development itself, went into foreclosure that same summer. Exactly as Dale had predicted it would, regardless of anything Greg did with my house. Greg lost the project entirely, along with most of what he'd invested in it over 3 years. For a while, his finances were about as bare as they'd been the week he made his choice. A nursing home consent form was easier to forge than an honest conversation with his own mother. He came by more often after that, not with peppermint candies and rehearsed smoothness, but plainly. Sometimes just to sit at my kitchen table the way he used to before any of this began, though now the visits felt different, quieter. A man slowly relearning how to be present without an angle underneath it. I keep thinking about what General Kessler said, he told me one evening in July. The 2 of us shelling peas from Carol's garden at my kitchen table. A task I'd assigned him without asking whether he wanted it. The way I used to assign tasks to soldiers who needed something honest to do with their hands. About it not being desperate. About it being calculated. Was he wrong? I said. No, Greg said after a long moment. He wasn't wrong. I told myself for months it was desperation, that I didn't have a choice, that I was protecting everyone by handling it quietly. But I knew, every single time I filled out one of those forms, exactly what I was doing. I just didn't let myself look at it directly. That's the beginning of something, I said, looking at it directly. Most people never manage that part at all. He took the financial counseling seriously, more seriously than I expected, given how little seriousness he'd shown toward his own affairs in the years leading up to Fairhaven. By autumn, he'd found steady work again, project management for a builder out of Indianapolis, honest wages instead of the speculative, over-leveraged gambles that had nearly cost his mother everything. Karen stayed, in the end, though Greg told me once, quietly, that staying had cost them both more than either had expected. Months of counseling, a trust rebuilt slower than either of them wanted, a marriage that survived, not because the wound healed quickly, because both of them decided, separately and then together, that it was worth the slow work of healing it properly. I saw General Kessler once more that year. At a small regional ceremony in Indianapolis, he insisted I attend. 3 other veterans from our old command received decorations of their own that had been similarly lost and finally found. He'd aged since the courthouse lawn, I thought, watching him from across the room, though his spine was still as straight as it had been the day he stood on that gravel lot and saluted a woman half the building had been told was nobody worth calling. "You look well, Colonel," he said, finding me during the reception afterward. "I feel well," I said. "Better than I have in years, if I'm honest." "Any regrets?" he asked, "about how quiet you kept it? There are people in this room tonight who never knew your name until a courthouse lawn in Briarfield made the county paper." I thought about that question the way I thought about every question that mattered. Slowly, checking it from more than one angle before I answered it out loud. "No," I said finally. "I spent 30 years being quiet on purpose, Ray. It was never shame. It was simply how I chose to carry it. I don't regret the quiet. I only regret that it took my own son mistaking it for weakness before anyone thought to ask what was underneath it." "Well," Kessler said, raising his glass slightly, "an old soldier's small toast, they know now." "Some of them," I said, "the ones who needed to." I kept Ray's letter in the drawer of my nightstand, folded along its original creases. Beside the green ledger I still filled in by hand every week. Bills and deposits and receipts. The same steady accounting I'd kept for 50 years. Through deployments and a marriage and a son's slow unraveling, and eventually, his slower, harder rebuilding. On quiet evenings, I sometimes took the letter out and read the last line again, though I no longer needed to. "Don't ever let anyone tell you what it's worth." I understood now, better than I had the day Nadine first placed that envelope in my hands, that Ray hadn't only meant the house. The dress uniform hangs in my closet again, not folded at the bottom of a suitcase, not hidden behind ordinary clothes, hanging in plain view the way it always should have. Ribbons catching the light from the window some mornings, when I open the closet door for something else entirely. I don't wear it often. I don't need to. It did what it needed to do the one time it mattered. On a cold courthouse lawn, in front of 30 strangers, and a son who finally asked the right question, a little too late and a little on time. On the first cold evening of that autumn, I sat at my kitchen table with the green ledger open in front of me, the dress uniform visible through the open closet door down the hall. Ray's letter tucked back safely in its drawer. Emily was staying the weekend, asleep upstairs in the room that used to be Greg's. The house held that particular quiet that comes only after a long fight has finally, honestly, ended. I picked up my pen, the same steady hand that had never once shaken when it mattered. I wrote one final line beneath the last entry in the ledger. I didn't take anything from him. I just stopped holding it up. I sat there a moment longer before I stood, the pen still warm in my fingers, the fields outside gone dark past the window. 50 years of ledgers, and only that last line ever felt finished. Then I closed the book, turned off the kitchen light, and went to check on my granddaughter, sleeping soundly in a house that had, at last, gone quiet on its own terms. Outside, the porch light caught the edge of the dress uniform through the closet door, and I let it stay lit a while longer than it needed to be.